The words real and Oxford don't go together very well, it seems, or certainly not in the popular imagination. Real where, people ask, what next? Real Narnia, real Disneyland, real Middle Earth? When I told people I was writing a book called Real Oxford, the jokes were, of course, predictable. And on the face of it, the city of dreaming spires is about the last place we might expect to find the real, or indeed anyone who knew much about it, though some might have glimpsed it from the window of a passing train or an airport bus. This city of 150,000 inhabitants is the term-time home of 45,000 students from 2 universities. It's visited each year by 7 million tourists. It's a good bet, I think, that neither the students nor the tourists have come for the real Oxford, but for the mythical Oxfords that they've seen in films or read about in books, or been, like me, encouraged to apply to study at. As for the remembered Oxfords, which may be even less real than the imagined ones, alumni groups in more than 100 countries cater for hundreds of thousands of people, nostalgic for the place they briefly lived and learned in. I'm nostalgic for Oxford, and I'm still here. To be in Oxford is to be in several places at once, several eras too. These places and eras merge and overlap and re-become distinct, often in the course of a single walk. And I've tried in my book called Real Oxford to create a sense of sort of lateral Oxford rather than linear Oxford. I'm not just interested in the then behind the now, that's easy enough, Oxford's full of then. What I've tried to do is to make Oxford more polyphonic about the stories it tells about itself, more diverse in the stories that it's ready to hear about itself. The city of light and learning is also a place with plenty of darkness. In practical terms, everything that I wrote about in this book, which was written during lockdown, though I don't think of it as a lockdown project, it's more my attempt, really, after 30 years here, to notice the place, really. In practical terms, then, what I write about can be seen on foot. So from the pavement, the towpath, traffic islands, the bridges, the roundabouts, the muddy banks, the rivers, the edgelands, and all the places in between. Real Oxford is also in between Oxford, I think. The one constraint I imposed on myself turned out actually to be a liberation. Everything, except what I've invented or remembered, which is quite a lot of the book too, everything can be visited or looked at without paying. And that's not a small feat in an Oxford where places, colleges are becoming pay-per-view. All these years in Oxford, since 1991, I'd seen the place, of course I had, but I had never really noticed it. And the obvious place to start is at the beginning, which for many of us is Oxford Station. And as many of you will recall, Oxford Station is something of a disappointment. So I'm going to begin here. And you'll see that this is a resolutely personal take on the place that we know. Arriving in Oxford by train, the traveller could be forgiven for thinking they disembarked at Swindon. I certainly did, and I'd never even been to Swindon. Edward Thomas called this approach to Oxford the most contemptible in Europe. Over the years, I've watched the tourists line up their wheelie cases, adjust their rucksack straps, raise their eyes in anticipation, the way I did when I came. This is one of the world's most famous cities, home to the legendary university. They've seen the movies, they've got the postcards, they've read the novels, they're culture vultures bound for the Ashmolean, Harry Potter addicts, Alice in Wonderland fans, Tolkien aficionados, or maybe shopaholics heading to the Westgate, students embarking on their first term. All of us arrive here with our own Oxfords in mind. Judging by the tourist faces at the ticket barriers, none of those Oxfords is this one. They're expecting something grand, maybe like Newcastle Station, or old-fashioned and cosy, like Hereford. But no, Oxford Station looks like the shell of a bankrupt garden centre. Tacky glass doors, blue PVC fascias, and toilets that are small and rank, the air inside them untroubled by any form of ventilation. Welcome to Oxford. Knowing what the station might have been like makes it worse. As with all the towns and cities, there are past Oxfords and virtual Oxfords, and I imagine this one, the real Oxford that I've lived in for nearly 30 years, flanked by the Oxfords that were and the Oxfords that might have been. Now, they aren't necessarily better, but once you know about them, it's difficult to unknow them. And the station is a good place to think about these Oxfords because the city's railway history is a microcosm of its relationship to the world. Arrogant, but also insecure, high-minded, yet petty. Oxford was offered a branch line in 1837 with a station near Magdalen Bridge at the bottom of Cowley Road. That plan was rejected by landowners and by the city corporation because they feared the Abingdon Road tolls would dry up. The second proposal came a year later. This time it was the university that killed it, fearing that students would fall prey to London's evil influence, quote, improper marriages and other illegitimate connections, unquote. The Chancellor of the University, the Duke of Wellington, had a more general concern about rail travel. He was worried that it would encourage, as he put it, the lower orders to move about. Well, with today's rail fares, he needn't have worried, of course. But it's ironic to think of Oxford University being afraid of its students bringing unsavory and immoral ways from the outside world, because looking at some of the politicians this place has turned out, it's the outside world that should be afraid. Oxford's first station at Grandpont to the south was for a time a happy compromise. For the city, because students still had to pay tolls at Folly Bridge, and for the university because its security staff could patrol the station. So an agreement was reached with the company that students would only be sold tickets to suitable destinations. And Grandpont Station was opened by Brunel, though it lasted barely 30 years. It was small and flimsy and badly sited, and was a victim of competition in a golden age of industrial engineering. The city went from no stations to 3 stations in less than a decade. And so strong is the cultural and economic pull of London and the southeast today that we forget this important fact about Oxford. While the university pointed at London and also at Cambridge, Oxford as a South Midlands city pointed towards the industrial powerhouses of Birmingham and Wolverhampton. And you can see this as soon as you get out of Oxford Station. It's the brewery quarter, the jam factory, it's industrial Victorian Oxford right in front of the station. And this is still reflected in the travelling habits of town and gown. London and Birmingham take roughly an hour each to get to by train and cost more or less the same. For the gown, Birmingham seems remote and northern and far away, and many students and staff have never set foot there. But for Oxford people, Birmingham is a quick and easy destination for everything from concerts to shopping by way of superb Indian restaurants and the kind of old-style pubs Oxford got rid of in the 1990s. So the Oxford, Coventry, Birmingham, Wolverhampton line is as much part of Oxford's outlook as the Oxford, Reading, London line. And in fact, discovering Birmingham has been one of the greatest pleasures of my time in Oxford. So that's what you learn just by walking around one dingy station. Today's station, Oxford is a connected place. If you look at St. Fried's Square, or as the planner Thomas Sharp called it, Station Square, you see one of Oxford's great treasures, Frank Cooper's Marmalade Factory. This was designed by Herbert Quinton in 1902, and it's where Frank Cooper mass-produced the famous marmalade to his wife's recipe. And you can see the blue plaque to his wife on the high street, which is where their original grocery shop was. This factory was purpose-built and constructed by a local builder. In the first illustrated Alice in Wonderland, there's a pot of Frank Cooper's marmalade down the rabbit hole. There's also a jar in the breakfast scene in James Bond's From Russia with Love. And in fact, if you go to the Museum of Oxford, you'll see Captain Scott's jar found among his things in the Antarctic. Englishness in a jar, basically. The building is known as the Jam Factory, but if you get up really close, forget about going into the centre of town for now, leave the station, walk over to the Jam Factory and look at its extraordinary design. You can tell its major purpose was marmalade because it's got these stone carvings of oranges in the facade. They're so detailed, you can see the pores on the rind of the oranges. So we're at Oxford's main intersection point, where the trains, the cars, the boats, the carts unloaded the oranges and the sugar, the malt and the hops for the breweries, the tourists and the students. And from which, after whatever processes and transformations they underwent, they all left again, headed out into the world. Another of my favorite places, which everyone of course knows, is the covered market. This is a delight to walk through at any time of day. And what struck me about it was that the mix of shops is a microcosm of the world. Butchers, bakers, fishmongers, vegetable stalls, then pie shops, cake shops, snack bars, coffee and tea merchants, then shoe repairs, key cutting, framing shops, florists, and then finally the luxuries, scented candles, soap shaped like fruit, cookies, milkshakes, jewelry, baby clothes with slogans on, all that kind of stuff. If we look past the current incarnation of these shops, we realize they're all versions of things that were there 400 years ago. That is to say, grooming and luxury, lifestyle and comfort, basic needs. If you put an anthropologist in the market now, they could walk in and trace the place back to the 15th century. It's also a place where the nose has a lot to go on, even more perhaps than the eyes. You've got the high smell of hanging meat one moment, the next there's a camembert in the October of its days. Then you'll suddenly smell some lavender, candle waft, riding the smell of ice water, impregnated with fish juice. Then there's baking dough, then a fresh box of roses dropped so hard you can smell it in ripples. Then suddenly roasted coffee, cobbler's glue. It's the world in microcosm. I like it because it has a happy scrappiness, especially at the north end, where the butchers and the fishmongers and the bakers and the fruit and veg, things being loaded, unloaded, and then stuff you see underfoot, spots of blood, feathers, toothpicks, crushed flowers, crumbs, bits of salad. There are days I walk through and I feel that I'm in the 18th century. The lorries come in, just like the carts used to. The delivery boys cycle supplies to the colleges and the restaurants. The two best times to come, I think, are the first of all, really early in the morning to catch the deliveries as they come in. The day is fresh. It's like you've opened a can of the stuff. The second time, which I kind of prefer, is around 5 p.m. because there's two little bars ensconced in some empty units. And this is one of the interesting things about the market. Lots of units have sold up. Many of the butchers have gone. And what we're getting now are these little pop-up shops, pop-up bars, which kind of add something to one's day. So I often go there at about 5:15. I have an hour to watch people close their stalls down and take a few sips of beer or wine from these little wine and beer stalls. There are barrels and taps, and if you bring your own bottle, like in Europe, you get a discount. At Christmas, of course, the market is like something out of a Dickens novel. It feels like a costume drama which ends well, despite these hanging carcasses and bloody sawdust on the ground. Then there's Nash's bakers, who do old-style cakes. Now, you're not going to get any pain au chocolat or croissants here, thank you very much. No, you've got to have Battenberg cake or lardy cake. And then there's Brown's Cafe, an Oxford institution that looks unchanged since the 1950s. There's also a wonderful shop specializing in cakes. And when I went the other day, yesterday in fact, there was a cake resembling a Gucci bag and one representing the Kassam Stadium. And they also have a sample cake with "Your message here" written in icing. And this is where we go to have our cakes made for parties and things. So their commissions, football fields, golfing greens, Morris miners, celebrating, of course, Oxford's history as a motor city. And here, just to remind you, the only visual aid I'm going to use, here is the front bonnet badge of the great Morris miner made just up the road over there in Cowley. So that's a bustling place. However much things change, if you want to get a sense of Heraclitus's idea of time, not stepping into the same water twice, you know, the river might be the same, but the water is different, go to the market. All the shops might be different, but it's still the same market. Somewhere that isn't the same, sadly, and many of you may not know this, is Boswell's. And I'm going to say a quick RIP, rest in peace, to Boswell's, 1738 to 2020. Boswell's is gone. And as I was taking my notes for my book about Oxford, the carcass of Boswell's was being picked clean by the hyenas of late capitalism, that is to say, bargain hunters. And this venerable old shop, founded a few doors away from the market at Cornmarket Street, has occupied the same building since 1929. It was the second oldest department store in the world. Everyone loved Boswell's. It was a trip into the 1950s, not just in terms of its stock, you know, doilies, tea cozies, ramekins. Ramekins is actually a word I learned by going to Boswell's, but also in terms of staff who seemed shaped by the age of rationing, so much so that they actually found it hard to sell you things. It was a place to go if you wanted to hear also the last vestiges of the Oxford accent in the city centre. Boswell's was a resolutely local employer. The staff also had a tendency to direct you to other shops to buy things, and actually my main memory of shopping in Boswell's was being told to go somewhere else. I said everyone loved Boswell's. What I deliberately didn't say was that everyone shopped at Boswell's, and that's because it was easier and cheaper to love local and shop global. We thought, Boswell's, it's lasted this long without us. Why not another century? So we'd go in and buy maybe bin liners once a year, a teapot every 5 or 6 years, and we'd expect it to survive all that staff, all that misjudged stock, those inconvenient stairs, those shelves of terrible tea cozies. We'd browse the kitchenware basement, and then we'd order online. We'd feel a bit guilty. We'd tell ourselves, but it's okay. Boswell's will be fine. There's bound to be someone coming in later who's going to buy that Pyrex dish full price, along with a 12-pack of doilies, some ramekins, an electric blanket, and that mushroom-coloured bedding set. There's bound to be someone buying all that, isn't there? Isn't there? Well, there wasn't. One of the things that has defined my time in Oxford, for good or for ill, is gentrification. And I was part of gentrification too. I arrived in 1991. I bought my first house in 1998. And this section that I'm going to speak out to you is about the Cowley Road. It's called Doris, Olive, Clive, and Peter, a Cowley Road story. On Princess Street, I like to check on my first house. Today, a young couple is moving out, loading a van. I ask if I can pop in and look around. I explain I used to live here. I feel that some part of us, incidentally, still lives everywhere we've ever lived, but I don't say that to them because I sound like a weirdo. When I first came to Oxford, academics and London commuters priced out of Jericho and North Oxford were moving east into Cowley Road. The developers were too. Areas like Jericho, which were affordable up until the mid-90s, were now out of range for young academics. East Oxford was our territory. The place started to glow with dinner parties seen through newly installed sash windows. You could smell the asparagus steaming. It's still going on. And the worst of it was that people I used to peer at through these windows in the soft lit rooms with such contempt were people like me. Those weren't windows, they were mirrors. When I moved here, the challenge was to furnish my house. Looking at that house again in 2020, I see it's all been done up and it's been full of all of the latest gadgets. It's also buy to rent, buy to let, so it belongs to a developer. And I remember that an hour after I walked into my brand new Princess Street house in 1998, my neighbor came to welcome me. She was called Doris, she was 93. She remembered both world wars. She had been born in the house she lived in, and she had that beautiful Oxford accent that you hardly hear anymore. She said to me that I would be happy in Oxford, and I would love living on Cowley Road because people weren't nosy, they just looked out for you. Doris lived on her pension from the British Potato Board, which had been situated in Cowley, and she'd worked there all her life. She was in the early stages of dementia. She often asked me to buy things, and I would go to Tesco, which was 2 minutes walk away, and bring them back, and she would eye me suspiciously. Sometimes she went out shopping herself, alone, and get lost, even though, of course, she was only 5 minutes away. But, you know, all places are far from home when you're lost. Now, Doris died a year after I arrived. Her house was bought by a builder developer called Clive. He was local. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't a millionaire. He just bought houses, did them up, then sold them on. He knew the housing stock. He dug up Doris's garden for his extension and found the buried bodies of 13 cats, her lifetime in pets. I remember their grey skeletons, some leathery with their skin like beef jerky, and some so dry they exploded when they hit the skip. He was good company, was Clive. We drank together over the fence once or twice, and once went to the pub. I found his politics unpleasant. He found mine hypocritical, but we got on as neighbours have to. He liked people on a one-to-one basis, but he didn't think much of humanity as a whole, which is a trait I've noticed on the political right. But maybe that was a change from middle-class lefties like me, who liked the idea of humanity in the abstract, but somehow found that individuals never measured up. That's the kind of thing you don't learn in an Oxford PPE degree. Gentrification is middle-class bad faith. We lied to ourselves. We pretended that what we loved about East Oxford was its character, its difference, its authenticity, and yet we changed it to make it less and less like itself and more like us. Real Oxford? Oh yes, please, I'd love some. Could I have mine decaf, please? 2 years later, I moved out and I sold my house to a Welshman called Peter, who owned a diving business in Belize. I looked him up recently when I was writing this to see what he was up to. Not very much, because he was found in his flat in the island paradise of Ambergris Cay in 2015 in a state of decomposition so advanced it was impossible to tell how he died. The local papers and websites tended towards conspiracy theories to do with smuggling and contraband. And as I stood in my old house, I remembered Peter describing how his company created artificial wrecks to drop onto the seabed for rich divers to find. Apparently it's good business. What I most remember is his joke about Oxford, and he would make it all the time, that Oxford was also a bit like that, an artificially maintained wreck that we all believe we've discovered. At the end of Princess Street is today the East Oxford Community Centre. It used to be the boys' school that Clive attended. It's now a Chinese centre. When I was last there was a Romanian flag flying above the old school. It was the Romanian presidential election, and there was a queue outside. Parked roundabout were the Ubers and the taxis with their flashing lights. And I thought, how little time has passed, and yet how much has passed. Doris, Clive, Peter, they're the past. This is the present. And I still feel that I'm somewhere in between, really. And that's how Oxford continues to make me feel. Some cliches make their debuts as truth and have remained truths. It's a cliche that Oxford is a place of beauty and privilege, that the education it provides is world class. But it's also true, isn't it, that however hard we've worked, however much we feel we've earned it, we're still lucky to be here. Oxford University has no campus, but the street where the university looks most itself is Broad Street. I start on the small cross where the martyrs were burned and head east. Balliol College, Trinity, Turl Street, Jesus, Lincoln, Exeter, tucked away, Blackwell's bookshop. Blackwell's, of course, sell their Harry Potter merchandise and run their walking tours of Oxford. There's the elegant Oxford walking tour. There's the Oxford ghost tour. I wonder if they'll run my own real Oxford walk. But who wants the real when you can have the fantasy? I pass the Sheldonian every day. I cross through the Bodleian Quad. I cut into Cat Street, where the Bridge of Sighs links to parts of Hertford College. It's all beautiful, of course. So it's full of people taking photos, even today, even in the depths of COVID, trying to snap students. The Radcliffe Camera is a courtyard of cobbles, surrounded on all four sides by splendour. This Oxford, the less real Oxford, is where one person's daily life is someone else's film, where our ordinary day is someone else's fantasy. So I try to stay patient with the selfie sticks and the group shots, the slow walkers, the rubbernecking. I've seen people poking cameras attached to selfie sticks through the open windows of student rooms, trying to get shots of them. I've seen tourists buy students' gowns as they returned from exams. Merchandise is, of course, available from the souvenir shops, of which there are now dozens in Oxford, but maybe we're becoming the merchandise ourselves. How many of us who live in Oxford are in the backgrounds of photographs on faraway walls, shelves, continents away? Well, I know I am. In 2010, I met a couple from the US who came here in 1993 on honeymoon. 17 years later, they were back with their children in tow. And as I was crossing Magdalen Bridge, they called out to me. Me? I mouthed across the traffic. Yes, they mouthed in reply. They were showing Oxford to their teenagers. They were reenacting the old photos. They showed me one from Magdalen Bridge. There I was. There I am, sitting on the parapet in a red t-shirt. I cross that bridge twice a day, sometimes more. And there I was again, the concierge of someone else's holiday memories. Filming has been a constant feature of life here. I've enjoyed spotting a year or two later the scenes I walked past during filming, the actors smoking, getting their faces redone, eating sandwiches between scenes. Right now, this morning, I read the Oxford Mail and found out that Steven Spielberg is filming something with Tom Hanks in Oxford at the moment. Oxford changes us all, makes us all think that we've got a shot at starring in the film of ourselves. But regardless of that, we are all extras in the centuries-long film that is Oxford itself. But behind the film reel, there is the real Oxford. The strangest effect of living and working here is the suddenness with which I can escape the crowds, the traffic and the noise by opening a gate and letting it close behind me. Yesterday, the cars and buses were banked up on Banbury Road. Parks Road was clogged up in both directions. The back gate of my college clicked shut with the smoothness of an expensive fridge door. Going into college was like putting on noise-cancelling headphones, but it cancelled more than just noise. Oxford gives us world-cancelling headphones, and we need to be careful of that. But only until we leave again, and however long we're here, 3 years or 30, we always do leave. Thank you.